When I think about the past, I remember William Faulkner's beautiful line from Delta Autumn. The past isn't dead, it isn't even past. I'd like to just start by invoking a series of instances and images all having to do with memory. I'm thinking of a series of tweets I received this past fall during the election from neo-Nazis, some featuring images of the ovens of Auschwitz, some featuring images of lynchings, some linking articles from so-called scholars denying that the Holocaust ever happened, Holocaust deniers whose insanity the internet has helped spread and legitimize. These tweets meant to silence and terrify me, as were sent to many who were merely expressing critique of the fascist leanings of the candidate Donald Trump, came in the thousands, not just to me, but to many others. I didn't receive thousands, but there were thousands and thousands sent. Memory. In New Orleans recently, this past couple of weeks, the removal of 4 Confederate monuments, sparking some outrage and some great joy and a huge amount of conversation among people who share very different memories, ancestral and generational memory of what those monuments represent. An 11-year-old girl in 1977, standing at Arlington National Cemetery and looking over the miles of gravestones of fallen soldiers and having it hit her for the first time in her life, what the scope of war might really be. This child grew up in an Army family, but her father and his 3 brothers, all veterans of the Army, never traded war stories or wanted to talk about their service. When her father ate dinner, she could hear a small popping noise from his jaw. He was shot in the Korean War, but he never felt it was something that he wanted to talk about. He had memories that mattered to her and did not share them with her. In the Deep South, a 21st century socialite holds a plantation party, complete with caterers and guests dressed as house slaves. Memory. In New England, a Unitarian Universalist minister finds out that his forebears were slave traders and slave owners. And in trying to reconcile that with his family's memory of who his forebears were, he travels to Ghana, to a place where the enslaved were auctioned off. A sign in the Armenian Quarter in the city of Jerusalem that I came upon just a month ago or so promotes an event to remember the Armenian genocide that began in 1915 and has yet to be acknowledged as such by the Turkish government. A living memory, a living trauma. The photo album you picked up while going through your grandmother's things and looked through, and when you came upon an interesting photo, you asked, "Grandma, who's this with you?" And she asked you, startled, "What are you looking at?" and snatched the photo album out of your hand. Memory. Memory is sacred. It is personally sacred because it allows us to follow a through line of our lives and thereby make sense of our lives, even if they've been troubled or disrupted or disruptive. Memory helps a person and a people to stay integrated and whole, so that every part of our lives can belong to the other parts. Memory is therefore a function of the soul, which is not just personal but ancestral and communal. That is why the loss of memory is so particularly cruel. The spirit, I think, is of the now, and perhaps of the future. The energy that animates us and moves us on and connects us through our senses to the present moment. But the soul has a need for memory, not just of our personal history, but of our shared history and of the entire human history itself. To honor memory is one of the chief functions of the religious life and religious community. But memory is not a science. It is a prism refracted through the human brain and human emotions, all of which are more complex and tricky than we know. One person's memory of a difficult marriage, for instance, will be dramatically different than that of that person's partner's memory, because some people are more inclined to remember the good things and the happy times. The other may be even genetically inclined to remember the times within that marriage of alienation, the loneliness, the misunderstandings and frustrations. But yet it is, as May Sarton writes in her poem, All Souls, memory makes kings and queens of us. What has been plated cannot be unplated. Plated like braids being woven together. What we call history is actually the project of remembering rightly. That's actually what history is. And the reason that we need new studies and new historical analysis all the time on the same subjects is not because we are morbidly fascinated with the past or stuck in it, but because we cannot move through the traumas and the failures of the past and build a new way characterized by wisdom, understanding, and justice if we do not remember rightly. And in that project of remembering rightly, we have to go back and recover and restore memories that were never included in the telling of that history in the first place, and perspectives that were not honored at the time. And so we are constantly weaving together memory and plating it together. Each new generation must understand whence its current problems come, and can't do that until they remember rightly and do right by those memories. Right now in our country, we are in the midst of a grand perversion of memory. An attempt by ultra-conservatives to prevent moral people from their task of remembering rightly. When White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer responded to Syrian President Bashar Assad's use of chemical weapons in April, he said that not even Hitler used chemical weapons. Hello? No. And then, being corrected quite vehemently, he tried to clarify his gaffe by saying, he didn't use them on his own people. People who care about the moral imperative to remember rightly were angry and alarmed. Hitler most certainly did use chemical weapons, and he used them on his own people. He used them on German Jews. So those who are guardians of memory must pay close attention to language of history and how those in authority interpret it or reinterpret it. And I want all of us, I invite us all to think about this together. We are going to enter into some theological reflection together following the music. But while the choir sings, I just invite you to think about the questions in your bulletin that we will be talking about in small groups. Who taught you history? Whose perspective do you think you learned? From your generational perspective, are there aspects of history that are in danger of being forgotten or lost? What are they? They could be very local, they could be familial or national, whatever it is that you might identify. What history must we absolutely protect and truthfully transmit to our children in order to move forward in moral progress and courage? So that's what we will be talking about in small groups in a moment.